So here I am, 30-minute painter, and I'm about to paint Jeanie. Now, Jeanie is a lovely little boy with a very cheeky smile. So first of all, I've squared off my canvas, which you probably can't see very well. You can just about see one little line down the middle. That's so that I can try and get the right proportions in the right place by looking at both the photograph, which I'm working from, and translating that onto the canvas. So I sketch in his body and his shape very quickly, and I block in colour, so I've got something to work with. Now Jeanie is mainly white with some brown and black patches, so you can see I've got a lot of white on there. The brown patches around his eyes, and I'm just going to put in the main shape so I can move out from there. I may find I change these slightly as I move along, but for the time being, it gives me a base to work on. So you can see the colours are in there as shades as well. So whilst his body is mainly white, it's also a little in shade because, as you'll see later on, there's light streaming in from behind him, so that puts the front of his body in shade. Dark patches around his ears and into his eyes. Eyes are always the most difficult part because eyes really are the windows of the soul, and if you don't get that expression right in the eyes, then none else of it works, funnily enough. It's a very strange thing, that. So I've now got majority of the shapes, the tones and the colours in, and I'm just going to start really working on detail at this point, putting in more white where there is white, highlights where there are highlights, moving around the eyes and trying to make sure, like I said, I've got that right expression in there, literally giving the detail to the body. And that also includes putting in some of the darker patches as well. So here I am, I put it in. I'm actually being quite blocky and not worrying too much about this being very fine detail at the moment, because I know I am going to go back and really deal with that. So here we have a fair bit of detail going in at this point. The funny thing about painting animals, people, anything actually, is that you quite often find you change things as you go along. And it all looks very straightforward when you watch somebody painting something, but actually there are times when you despair and you go back over something over and over again. Anyway, here I am, I'm putting in detail, and I've decided that actually that nose is wrong. And so here I am, I'm going to change it. Here's a case in point. I'm really trying to measure out again compared to the markings I've got on my canvas and the markings I've got on my photograph, and just try and get the proportions exactly right, because sometimes when you sketch things in you don't get it quite right, and as you see the painting develop you realise that you haven't got it quite right, and you can be critical about what you need to change much better when you've got more actually on your canvas and you're seeing more and you're starting to get to know your subject as well. So I'm adding in more highlight here, and I'm happier with the shape of his nose, and when you get something right, all of a sudden everything else starts to fall into place. So until you get that, it is a little bit of trial and error. Again, I've decided that his eye was slightly too high for the tilt of his head here, so I've gone back over that. This is the beauty of oil paint. You can paint over and over again until you do get it right, or right to your satisfaction anyway. So I am now just going to block in where his eye is in a slightly different position, so I've given more tilt to his head, which adds to his cheekiness, because he has got this amazingly cheeky little sort of almost like smile to him as he looks at you. Very appealing, very big eyes. I've also slimming down his front, because he's actually quite a slimline chap, and so I will go over that quite easily when I've doing the background, but it also helps for me placing him and seeing him as he is if I correct things as I go along. So putting detail in starts to really bring out exactly what you're looking for in your subject, and it's quite a painstaking process, because sometimes you'll go over and over again. You'll paint in a little bit and you'll paint too much of it out, or you'll smooth too much of it. So I I will be going over Jeanie's face and all of his fur on his body quite a lot. There are several layers of this on here as I build up that sense of the shape of fur, the way it flows, because although you just think of fur on a dog as sort of smooth, it does actually have a texture to it, and it flows in different ways. It creates ripples in their body, and you have to try and follow that with your painting strokes. So I'm trying to do that here with him, and add in those little details which just create that expression he has on his face, that very appealing expression, I have to say. So moving on down onto his body, I'm also here bringing in the detail, but also softening it, so my paint strokes aren't too harsh. Now, this is what I mean by softening. I'm fan brushing his body, so this creates almost like a blur of all of that paint that I can then go back to and put in individual small brush strokes to show the movement of his fur, because he's got very smooth fur. He's a short-haired dog, so it's very smooth, but as I say, there is still texture and direction to it, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding in that texture and direction over the very smooth body base I had underneath, and little highlights as well, just to bring out where the light is streaming through onto him. And again, softening up his back leg and creating the formation of it. So final little touches now, moving on to his face, and again, all these touches are little directional touches with the fur, so you really get the effect of the fur on his face. A little bit more of the highlights going in here, and I will take these down the body as well. And I will also add in more of the white, where it's really come through, a little blaze on his the top of his head, and there's little dots of light that we catch in our eyes, and dogs' eyes are very different to human eyes, so we can't sort of like move them in exactly the same as we would do on a human's portrait. So it's very important to look exactly where the light is reflecting in eyes, because that really makes such a difference to the expression you get when you depict them. So I've also softened up around his nose, around his muzzle. There's that little smile he's got, but he's got a very kind of bright white muzzle, but again, some of it, there's a little bit of it in shade because I've got the light coming in from behind. So I'm still just adding in all those shapes just to give it sort of like that structure and that form. So you can see he's kind of got a rounded body. And then finally I'm going to put in the background, lovely blue to offset him, and this is where on a blue settee that he loves to lie on anyway. I'm putting in some folds in the drapes there to give it a little bit more definition and interest. Again, you can see I'm fan brushing to soften those darks and lights, those shadowed areas to show the folds. It also gives me a chance to really darken up around him to sort of make his body pop out at you. The white of the window obviously also really offsets that, but I also have to blend it into his fur and his neck because that really catches up the highlight. And the last little touch is the plants in the window frame. And that little black spot on his back. And there he is, Jeanie, with that lovely, appealing little face. You can see more of my painting demos on my 30-Minute Painter YouTube channel, and go and have a look on my website, www.deborahmartin.co.uk, for lots more information about painting and writing.